In this video, I'm going to use ChatGPT to create a class to anonymize people's names. Here's the scenario. You have content that you're trying to create and you're using real names and questions from the internet. And what you want to do is take the names like Strud, Andy, and Christelle and change them to another name that's still realistic but doesn't identify the original person. I'm just going to take you over to Visual Studio and you'll see that I have a data file here with people's names in it. We've got Michael, Dot, and Andy. And from them, there are also more detailed data files with other people's names. And these are people's names that would have replied to a question. What I want to do is take every name and run it through an anonymization routine. But the other thing I want to do is I want to vet the names that are coming out of it. And if there's a name that I don't like, I want to be able to refresh it on a regular basis. The way I want to go about that today is to just use ChatGPT to create this class for me. Head over to ChatGPT and look at a prompt that I've written, and it starts off with, I need a class, I need you to anonymize people's names. The way I want to use it is that there'll be a dictionary of some sort with the original name followed by the anonymized name. And one of the things is a flag called refresh. And the idea of the refresh flag is that if I set it to true, I should be able to get a new name generated. If it gets set to false, it'll stay fixed. If the refresh flag is true, it means that I'm not happy with the new name and it can be recreated. If you receive an original name, so this is a name that you've already seen before, you will add it to the dictionary and set the refresh flag to true. You only add names that you have not seen before. I will need some sort of lookup function on the original name so that I can get the anonymized name. And I want the information stored in a JSON document. I don't really care how it names it. One of the reasons I do that is because I find it's pretty good at coming up with the right names. And since naming is an incredibly important aspect of programming, let's take it out of our hands and let the computer do it for us. Before you write code, I would like you to describe the structure of the class, meaning what methods and properties. The reason that's important to me is that I don't necessarily like every bit of code that GPT writes, so I want to have a look at what it thinks is a good way of going about it, and then I might tweak that a little bit before I get it to generate code. I want this in Ruby. That's the programming language I'm using for this particular problem. ChatGPT has come up with this idea of a class called Name Anonymizer, and I'm pretty happy with that as the name, and it believes it will need a dictionary to store the information. I guess the person's original name will go into this location, and the mapped name or the anonymized name will go into this location. I assume it's going to work on the idea that if refresh is true, it would regenerate the name before persisting it back into the JSON document. It has a concept of a file name and it defaults to name mapping.json. I'll be happy with that. It has a constructor and initializer. There's nothing mentioned here about it taking the file name as a parameter, so maybe you have to instantiate it, then set the file name if you want a custom one, and then work with the functions, but we'll see what it actually generates. It has the concept of anonymizing a name. Let's say we give my name David Crewis, and it comes back with Bob Smith. The thing is it will check for my name in the dictionary. If present, yes it does, then set the refresh flag to false. It returns the anonymized name. That might be the right flow. If not present, or if the refresh flag is true, it generates a new anonymized name. If it comes back with Bob Smith, and I don't like that, then I can set the flag to true and just call my name again to get a different name back. Now, then there's a method here called refresh anonymized name. I guess this is the method that's going to do the work. What's it say? Sets the refresh flag to true for a given name so that a new anonymized name can be generated next time. It's really just setting the flag in this case. I think this name is not necessarily the best name because I got the impression it was going to do an action, but it's actually only going to change a state. If I wanted to give a bit extra instruction to ChatGPT, that might be the area that I do it. But quite frankly, it's probably going to be easier just to change it in code after the fact. But we'll just see what else it's got here. The next one is lookup with an original name. This is the main method that would get called each time. Returns an anonymous name based on an original name. Then there's a save to file and a load from file. Additional considerations. The anonymized name generation process, you could use simple naming patterns or integrate a more sophisticated name generator. What I think I'm going to do is suggest to it that it uses a Ruby gem called Faker. Instantiate the class, which loads the existing directory or creates a new one. Not necessarily what I want to do. I probably want to have a little bit of control there, but we'll see. Call lookup to get the anonymized name for an original name. And optionally call refresh anonymized name if you want to refresh flag for the name. Maybe this status name is okay. We'll see once this generates. Does this structure align with your requirements? It's close enough. I've decided to do a couple of customizations. The first one is if I look at the refresh anonymized name, it's actually a pretty good calling technique to work this way, but it wasn't the way I was planning to use it. My plan was that if the JSON document on the server changed, then the next time that this method is called, the getting of a new anonymous name, it would just go and refresh at the time. What I'm going to do is, rather than even coming up for a name for this method, it's really interesting when you struggle to find the right name that ChatGPT may actually be able to solve this problem. So we'll just write this little prompt, and I've already pre-written it. I think the name refresh anonymized name does not match the intent. This name suggests that the anonymous name will be refreshed, but really it's just setting a state flag, which will only ever need to be processed the next time the name is requested. Give me 5 names that might be better. Let's see what it does. It's come up with 5 different names. They're all pretty good. Mark for update, set refresh flag, and schedule name refresh. This is probably the most obvious one. I know it does not conform to Ruby-cop, which is a linter in the Ruby language. They do not like using setters and getters like that. And that gets me thinking that I might just get it to go with mark for update. Here's the class that it's generated. It's called an anonymous name generator. I don't believe that's what it came up with before. It said name anonymizer. I'm going to copy that because I prefer this name for what it wants. It's got requirements for JSON and file utilities. I believe the project I'll use this in already have that, so it could be removed. It's then got an attribute accessor for the underlying mappings. How about we go through it quickly, then come back and look in detail. An initializer, which calls a method called load or initialize mappings. There's a method for getting anonymous name and one for mark for update. That looks good. There's the ability to save a mapping, and there's the ability to generate anonymized names. This is not actually what I wanted to do. I guess I forgot to use the Faker gem as part of the requirements. I think we'll end up regenerating this, but let's look a bit further. And then we've got a private method called makedir for file. And what that's doing is taking the file name, looking at any path that might be related to it, and then making a directory if it does not exist, if we use it here. And this is how we would use it. Generator equals anonymous name generator with the name of the file. Then you can get an anonymous name, or you can mark it for update. As I look through this, a couple of things stand out. This should be private. This is not a public method. It's making the directory, returning an empty hash if the file does not exist. Otherwise, it's loading it and parsing it from JSON into a hash. And it's being called in the initializer, but really that's a private method. I might tell it to do that. When I look at this section of code, I wouldn't necessarily write it this way. We've got this name mapping to the original name. So let's say the name is David Crewis for me. It would be at name mapping David Crewis. That's been called 3 times here and then returned here. Maybe a variable might have been a better technique. If it does find it, that's what gets returned. Otherwise, it generates a new one. What we've got here is checking for the mark for update is false. If it was true, it would keep moving down and get the anonymized name. And then we build up the structure that we want to store against the original name, save the mapping, return this anonymized name. I think all this code would work. The only thing I want to change is the name of the class and let it know to use the faker gem. I've just created a prompt that I'm going to use to generate this class. And one of the things I did was I did read through all of this again and picked out a couple of little tweaks that I want to do to the instructions. One of them being that I want it to use mark for update. And what I'll do is we'll paste it in here. Because I know some of the names can have 3 words in them or 2 words or 1 word, I don't really care what the source name is, but I do want to make sure that the generated name is always the first and the last. I've made that statement. I want to take any relative path qualified file name. So my belief is that I would use this and the JSON file might be in a subfolder from where it's being called. I want to make sure that it can handle concepts like config mynames.json or mycustomname.json, or if nothing is provided, and that's important to say if nothing is provided so that it realizes the initializer needs an optional parameter, and to use name mapping.json. The folder name might not exist. Can it pre-create it if it's there? I haven't actually stated pre-create the file. I think it's going to get it. Use the mark for update flag. Write this code in Ruby. We'll hit go and we'll see what it starts writing for us. Now, I've just gone and created a prompt just to make a couple of minor edits. To be fair, you probably just change its code yourself. But the good thing about ChatGPT is that you can get it to do all your work if you like. And learning the skill is really important as we move forward and it gets better and better at doing this sort of stuff. Can you rename the class to name anonymize? That's what I liked. Can you make a particular method private? There's these constant lookups against the dictionary, which could either be used in a variable. I think it was only in that one method, or there could be a memoized helper. Let's just press enter and see what it comes up with. The initialized code is not in this position anymore. We've got these 2 public methods, and then the load is now private, and we've got a memoized helper, and it's given us a description that it's reducing repetitive dictionary lookups. So I'm pretty happy with that. Let's see how that got used up here. Here's where it gets called. It's, say, mapping entry based off the original name, putting it into an entry variable, and then it just works with that entry variable wherever it needs to, except when it's creating the new one. I just had a look at this method, and this is not a memoirs pattern where you go off and do a long-winded process and then you store it in a variable, and then the next time you go to get it, you just use that variable again. Here it's just doing the process every time. So it didn't really understand that. I'm not even going to try again with ChatGPT. I'll just write the code myself. These are the little things that you do need to watch out for. It probably doesn't matter at all. This is just a dictionary lookup on a small file, so performance never is going to be a big concern with this particular class. If you have the opportunity to do it right the first time, you can do it right the first time. What we can do is go through this code, make a couple of tweaks if needed, and we'll test it out. The first thing I'll look at is this generate anonymized names. And what I can do is just take this code and replace it basically with the faker gem. I'm going to get rid of all the comments. I don't really need comments for things that are obvious. I like to use single responsibility methods, and the method names really match the intent. As I said, this is not a memoized helper, but one thing I did notice when I looked back over the code, I'll show you that this is probably still the right way to go. What I noticed is that the calling through to this method, both here and where's the other one there, is just being stored into a variable anyway. Now, if I'd done it the way I was suggesting to ChatGPT, then I would have had to call this method with the original name over and over again in this position and this position. This is still a better technique. I'll hit save on this file. I'll get a copy of the class name and head over to a unit test harness. It would be useful if we bring up a terminal with unit test runner all ready to go. Basically, I've just using it more as an integration test to call this method. The method is here, and I've set up a couple of names. The goal will be that this file will update. The first thing we look at is that we have an anonymizer. We will loop through all the names which are here, call the anonymizer.anonymized name with that name, and get a new value back. While I'm not using this as an actual unit test, there is an expectation that the anonymized name will not be the same as the regular name, so that should work, and that it matches the concept of having two words with capital and lower letters in it. And lastly, I just want to print out a key value pair to the console. I want to take the original name and the anonymous name. If I hit save, we get David Cruis being mapped to Nina, and Appy Dave mapped to Chet Flatley. That looks good, and we've also got our values here in the mapped file, and they're not marked for updates. If I call it again, and the best way to do that right here is just to hit save, it'll run it again, and we get the same values as before for both David Cruis and Appy Dave. What I'd like to do is test this update who, and we'll work with David Cruis. So what we can do is put my name into this particular parameter. If the parameter exists, then call mark for update with that particular value. What should happen is that value would become true when this is called. And then when it goes and loops through all the people here, when it gets this anonymous name, it would update this value and then set this from true back to false. I think it might be useful if we see that timing delay. So directly after I set that to true, we'll put in a 1 second pause before calling the new anonymous name. There it is there. And I'll just hit save. If we've got our terminal running, it should just work correctly. This is true. The name changed. It's back to false. If we keep doing that, it becomes true for a little while. The name will change and then back to false. If I want to do it for Appy Dave, I can just go and select that value, and now it'll be the second one is going to change here. Chet Flatley becomes Jonathan Scowen. I think one last thing to test is that if you wanted other names in there, I might just put in at winning prompts, Appycast, and Carnivore 90. Now, this code I'm going to be using for presentation capabilities within this YouTube channel, but these are various YouTube channels that I use. But here I'm just going to use the values to change them to people's names. I'll hit save, and hopefully we end up with 4 new entries in the system. Now, every time I refer to Fly Video, for instance, I will always get Moshi. If I hit save, that value does not change. But if I want Fly Video to change in this case, we'll just say at Fly Video, hit save, and now it's been updated to Deidre. Now that's an example of how you can create a class from scratch using just ChatGPT. And if you're interested in various automations that I create using prompt engineering and the GPT APIs, then maybe click one of the links in the description.